Eleanor Scott looked me dead in the eye and said, "Jacob, this house was promised to my son. You're just holding it for him." For a moment, I thought I misheard her. How could anyone claim ownership of a home my grandfather built decades before her HOA even existed just because she wore a title that said, "President, my lake house on Silver Willow had stood for over 20 years before a single HOA rule was written yet?" Now she insisted I hand it over to her spoiled 7-year-old boy who probably couldn't even mow a lawn by himself. I didn't realize those words were only the beginning of a nightmare: fake fines, threatening letters, midnight vandalism, and a forged deed designed to steal everything my family left behind. But I, Jacob Turner, wasn't about to bow to tyranny disguised as neighborhood rules. I fought back with the law, with evidence, and with every ounce of determination I had to protect the last piece of my family's legacy. Before we dive in, comment your location and local time below and subscribe so you don't miss one of the most unbelievable HOA showdowns ever told. The sun was just beginning to rise over Silver Willow Lake when I pulled into the gravel driveway that led to my grandfather's old cabin, now mine. It was peaceful, the kind of morning that made you forget the world could be cruel. Mist floated over the still water, birds called from the pines, and for a few fleeting minutes I felt lucky. My name was Jacob Turner, and I had inherited the one thing that still felt pure in this noisy, chaotic world: the Turner Lake House. My grandfather, William Turner, built this place with his own hands back in 1972, long before the lakeshore became the luxury zone it is now. The walls still smelled faintly of cedar and old pipe smoke. Every plank creaked the way it always had when I was a kid, sneaking cookies from the kitchen while Grandpa whittled wooden ducks by the window. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours, paid off, private, and protected by history. The neighborhood around the lake had changed dramatically since those days. What used to be modest fishing cabins and family cottages were now glass-walled vacation homes with docks big enough to host parties. The newcomers weren't bad people, just wealthy, disconnected from the kind of sweat that builds a home. And along with that wealth came something far worse: the Silver Willow Lakeside Homeowners Association. Now here's the thing: my grandfather's property predated the HOA by 23 years. According to county records, the Turner's plot was carved out long before the subdivision was ever platted. That meant one crucial detail: I wasn't a member, nor could I be forced to become one. It was written clearly in state law: pre-existing properties shall not be subject to newly incorporated homeowners' covenants unless voluntarily joined. But people like Eleanor Scott, the HOA president, never cared much for legal definitions. Eleanor was the kind of woman who walked around like the world owed her a crown. Her hair was always in that perfect salon curl, her voice sharp and commanding. To her, rules were sacred, but only when they gave her power. She'd been president for almost 6 years, and the stories about her were legendary. Fining an elderly couple for having the wrong shade of beige on their porch chairs. Threatening to tow someone's car because it had a non-conforming license plate frame. She was a walking lawsuit waiting to happen. I'd seen her around before, driving her pearl-white Lexus SUV past my property, glaring like she was auditing my existence. I always thought she was just nosy. I never imagined she was plotting something. That all changed one quiet afternoon in early spring. I had just returned from the grocery store, juggling 2 paper bags and my car keys, when I heard the unmistakable click of heels on gravel. I turned, and there she was, Eleanor Scott, marching straight toward me with a smug smile that made my stomach knot. "Jacob Turner," she began like a principal about to expel a student, "we need to talk about this house." I frowned. "What about it?" She clasped her manicured hands. "This home was promised to my son Aiden when he turns 18. You've had plenty of time to vacate, and I suggest you start making arrangements now." I nearly dropped my groceries. "Excuse me, promised by who?" "By me, of course," she said without hesitation. "The HOA has plans to expand community access to the lakeshore. Aiden will be part of that project. You wouldn't want to stand in the way of progress, would you?" For a moment, I was speechless. Then I laughed, the kind of laugh that escapes when your brain can't process the level of absurdity it's hearing. "Ma'am, this is private property. My family has owned it for over 50 years. I don't care what plans your little club has." Her smile vanished. "That's not how this works. You're surrounded by HOA properties now, which means your home is subject to community standards." "No," I said firmly. "It means you're surrounded by me." Her eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that." She turned sharply and walked back toward her car, her heels stabbing the dirt like punctuation marks to her threat. I thought that was the end of it, just another ridiculous HOA encounter I'd laugh about later. I was wrong. The first letter arrived 3 days later, a neatly folded notice taped to my mailbox. "Violation number 001. Non-compliant exterior hardware front door knocker. There was just one problem. I didn't have a door knocker. Then came another. Violation number 002. Improper lawn maintenance grass, excessively wet. That one nearly made me choke on my coffee. My backyard is the lake shore. The grass was wet because it was next to water. By the end of the week, I had a stack of fake citations thicker than a deck of cards. Each one looked official but wasn't signed by any recognized officer. The letterhead said Silver Willow HOA Enforcement Division, except there was no such division. I checked. It didn't exist in any record. I realized Eleanor had gone rogue. She was manufacturing fines, probably hoping to pressure me into submission. So I did what my grandfather always told me to do when dealing with bullies: document everything. I started keeping a binder. Every letter, every envelope, every timestamp from my mailbox camera, all neatly filed. When I compared the postmarks, I noticed something strange. All the letters came from Eleanor's personal P.O. box, not the HOA's official one. The harassment escalated quickly. Trash began showing up on my lawn. Someone smashed my mailbox with a bat. Spray paint appeared on the sidewalk spelling "Get Out." Thankfully, they didn't touch the cabin. I guess they were under orders not to damage what they planned to steal. That's when I knew it was time to act. I contacted Marcus Hale, a local attorney who specialized in property disputes. Marcus was sharp, calm, and had a dry humor that made me feel like I wasn't losing my mind. After reading the letters, he smirked and said, "She's either stupid or overconfident. Either way, we'll make her regret this." Marcus helped me file a police report for harassment and sent Eleanor a cease and desist letter citing state property laws. It outlined clearly that my home predated the HOA and that their covenants had no jurisdiction over my property. For a while, it worked. The fake letters stopped. The street was quiet. I even started sleeping peacefully again until one night, around midnight, when I heard voices outside. Whispers, footsteps on gravel, the crunch of glass. I looked through my bedroom window and saw 3 figures near the dock. Teenagers laughing, holding flashlights and something metallic. My stomach dropped. I recognized one of them instantly, Aiden Scott. His bright varsity jacket reflected under the moonlight like a warning sign. I grabbed my phone, started recording, and quietly loaded my registered shotgun. I didn't want violence, just safety. When I stepped onto the porch, I shouted, "Private property, leave now." They froze. One of them raised what looked like a baseball bat. "Go back inside, old man," he yelled. I flipped on the floodlight. The moment they saw the gun pointed safely downward, safety on, they bolted like deer. Tires screeched. Silence returned. That night, I filed another report. The police took it seriously this time: vandalism, trespassing, harassment. The officer even said, "You're not the first to complain about the Scotts." That's when I realized something bigger was brewing. Eleanor wasn't just harassing me for fun, she was testing boundaries, seeing how far she could go before someone stopped her. But I had no idea that soon she'd cross the line completely from harassment to criminal forgery. A week after that night, I woke up to the sound of paper slapping against my front door. When I opened it, another stack of fake citations fluttered to the porch. The top one read, "Final notice: failure to comply will result in forfeiture of property rights under Community Ordinance." Forfeiture, property rights, ordinance. She had actually typed those words like she was running her own government. I took a deep breath and let the absurdity sink in. Then, instead of ripping them up like before, I laid them neatly on my kitchen table, took photos of every page, and added them to my binder. That binder was getting thick, and so was my anger. Later that morning, I drove into Clearwater County to visit my lawyer, Marcus Hale. His office was tucked above a coffee shop downtown, the kind of place that smelled like old paper and determination. Marcus greeted me with his usual unshakable calm. "Jacob," he said, "I read through the police report. Seems our friend Eleanor is determined to impersonate a government agency." "Determined is one word," I muttered, sliding the new stack of citations across his desk. "Delusional might be better." He glanced through them, whistled softly, and leaned back in his chair. "She's overstepped. These letters aren't just harassment anymore, they're fraudulent legal threats. That's a criminal matter." "So what do we do?" Marcus smiled. "We remind her that the law bites harder than any HOA." That same afternoon, Marcus drafted a certified cease and desist addressed to both Eleanor Scott and the Silver Willow HOA board. It spelled everything out clearly. My property parcel 14A on the county map was recorded in 1972, long before the HOA existed. Under State Statute 41-223, no HOA may extend jurisdiction over properties outside their platted subdivision. Any further contact regarding fines or compliance would constitute harassment and extortion. He even copied the sheriff's department just to make the warning official. 3 days later, Eleanor received it. And I knew she did because that evening, her Lexus slowed in front of my driveway headlights, idling for a full minute before driving off. She didn't wave. She didn't even blink, just stared. For a while, things seemed calm. The letters stopped. The street went quiet again. I spent my mornings fixing up the dock, repainting the shutters, finally feeling like life was returning to normal. Even the neighbors, most of whom belonged to the HOA, began acting friendlier. A few nodded at me from across the street, maybe realizing the feud had gone too far. But peace never lasts long when power is threatened. One Saturday afternoon, while cleaning out the shed, I noticed a strange car parked across the street. 2 men sat inside, pretending to read a map. When I stepped outside, they quickly looked away. 10 minutes later, they drove off. That same evening, I found my trash cans tipped over, contents strewn across the lawn. My security camera caught only the back of a hoodie disappearing into the dark and a faint glimpse of Eleanor's white SUV waiting down the block. The next morning, I received another letter. This one wasn't a fake HOA notice. It was handwritten, signed E.S. Jacob. It doesn't have to be this way. Transfer the deed voluntarily, and I'll make sure you're compensated fairly. Otherwise, don't blame me for what happens next. No return address. Just venom. Marcus told me not to respond. Every letter she sends, keep it. We'll build a record. Harassment, intimidation, maybe even racketeering if she keeps using HOA resources. So that's what I did. I kept everything. Weeks passed and summer rolled in heavy and humid. Life at the lake should have been peaceful barbecues, fishing boats, laughter from kids splashing near the docks. But every time I looked toward Eleanor's grand lakefront mansion, I saw curtains twitch. She was watching me, always watching. Then one humid night in July, my motion sensor lights flashed at 1:43 a.m. I pulled up the live camera feed on my phone, and there they were again. 3 figures in hoodies sneaking around the edge of my yard. One of them kicked over my no trespassing sign. I called the sheriff immediately. By the time a cruiser arrived, the intruders were gone, but the officer, a calm man named Deputy Reed, stayed to review the footage. He paused when one of the figures turned slightly toward the camera. "That looks like Aiden Scott," he said quietly. I nodded. "I was afraid you'd say that," Reed sighed. "Jacob, I'll file the report, but you should probably think about upgrading your system. Maybe more lighting and alarm." I did exactly that the next day, new cameras, new locks, and a reinforced mailbox made of solid steel. This time they'd have to hit it with a truck to break it. For a brief period, nothing happened. I started to hope maybe the warning scared them off. But as I soon learned, Eleanor wasn't done yet, she was just changing tactics. It began with whispers in the neighborhood. People I barely knew started avoiding me. The mail carrier hesitated to stop at my box. One neighbor, Mrs. Holloway, told me that Eleanor was spreading rumors that I'd been illegally occupying HOA property. Another said she told the board that I was under investigation for property tax fraud. Marcus laughed when I told him. "That's classic defamation. Keep note of who repeats it. If this goes to court, hearsay from multiple residents will bury her." So I kept my head down, but my patience was thinning. Every morning I woke up expecting another stunt, and sure enough it came. One hot August afternoon, while mowing the front yard, I heard gravel crunching behind me. I turned and saw Eleanor herself walking up the driveway, clipboard in hand, wearing a sun hat so wide it looked like a shield. I turned off the mower. "You're trespassing, Eleanor." She smiled faintly. "Oh, don't be dramatic. I'm just here to conduct a visual inspection." "Inspection for what? .com. "For compliance." I laughed, shaking my head. "You've got no jurisdiction here. We've been through this." Eleanor tilted her chin upward. "That's where you're wrong, Mr. Turner. You see, we've recently updated the association's boundaries. The board voted unanimously to include your parcel." I blinked. "You can't just vote to seize private property. That's not how jurisdiction works." Her grin widened, almost gleeful. "You'd be surprised what a community can do when it's united." Something about the way she said united sent a chill through me. I stepped forward, my voice low. "Leave my property, Eleanor, now, or I'll have you removed for trespassing." Her eyes locked on mine, cold, unwavering. Then she slowly turned heels, clicking against the pavement as she walked back to her Lexus. Before getting in, she looked over her shoulder and said, "Enjoy it while you can, Jacob. You won't have it much longer." That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the lake listening to the frogs and the hum of distant traffic, trying to calm the storm in my chest. Every reflection on the water looked like another problem waiting to surface. The next morning I made a decision. If Eleanor wanted to play hardball, Then I would play by the book, every law, every record, every document she'd never bothered to read. Marcus and I spent the next week pulling public land records. What we found was crystal clear. The Silver Willow HOA's legal boundary map ended 2 lots before mine. There was even an annotated note from the county surveyor stating, Lot 14A, excluded due to pre-existing private deed. Marcus grinned like a man holding the winning hand in poker. She can't touch you, Jacob. Not legally. Then why doesn't she stop? I asked. Because he said people like Eleanor don't care about what's legal. They care about control. And when control slips through their fingers, they get desperate. He was right, because just a few days later, desperation turned into something far darker. That Friday, I came home from town to find a county truck parked in my driveway. A man in a reflective vest approached me, clipboard in hand. Afternoon, sir. We're here for a preliminary inspection. Property ownership verification. I frowned. Inspection ordered by who? He checked his notes. Says here. Silver Willow Lakeside HOA requested it. Claimed there's a boundary dispute. I clenched my fists. There's no dispute. The records are clear. He looked uneasy. Then you might want to talk to the county clerk. Your name's been flagged for a deed review. My heart sank. A deed review meant someone had filed a transfer or alteration request. And I already had a gut feeling who that someone was. The next morning I called Marcus. She's not just harassing me anymore, I said. She's trying to steal my house on paper. He went silent for a moment. Then he said, Jacob, it's time we dig deeper, real deep, and that's exactly what we did. When Marcus told me we were going to dig deep, I didn't realize he meant it literally. By the next morning, we were sitting in the dusty basement of the Clearwater County Clerk's office, surrounded by metal filing cabinets older than both of us combined. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, the air thick with that dry paper smell that always reminded me of time standing still. Marcus adjusted his glasses and started flipping through a series of deed books like a man searching for a ghost. Every property in this county leaves a paper trail, he said, even the fake ones. We started with parcel 14A, my grandfather's land. The file was simple, a clean chain of title running from William Turner to my father and from my father to me. No liens, no encumbrances, no covenants. It was as solid as the old wooden beams in my cabin. But then tucked behind the last notarized page was something new, a photocopy stamped "Received, pending review." Marcus froze. This wasn't here last time I checked. He slid the page toward me. It was a quitclaim deed dated just 2 weeks ago, transferring ownership of my property to Aidan Scott. The signature at the bottom read Jacob Turner. I felt my throat tighten. That's not my handwriting. I know, Marcus said grimly. And this notary seal, he leaned closer, belongs to a woman named Linda Chavez, registered in this county, but her commission expired 6 months ago. Expired. Yep, and the county stamp looks photocopied. Whoever forged this knew just enough to be dangerous. The clerk, an older man named Dale, wandered over when he heard us muttering. He peered at the document and let out a low whistle. I've seen that name pop up twice this week. You're not the first. What do you mean? Marcus asked. Someone's been submitting bogus transfers tied to HOA properties. Looks like they're trying to shift boundaries on paper, make old parcels look like part of new developments. We flagged 3 of them already. I clenched my jaw. You think Eleanor's behind all of them? Dale shrugged. Wouldn't surprise me. Some of those HOA types think the county records exist just to rubber stamp their paperwork. Marcus leaned back, tapping his pen against the desk. All right, he said finally. We're going to put a freeze on this file. No transfers, no updates, nothing moves until we're done investigating. He filled out an affidavit of fraudulent filing and had me sign it right there. Within an hour, my title was locked. If Eleanor tried to push another forged deed, it would bounce straight back. But even with the legal safety net, I couldn't shake the unease crawling under my skin. Someone had gone through the trouble of faking my signature, finding a lapsed notary seal, and walking the document right into the county office. That wasn't just arrogance, it was intent, and intent meant she wouldn't stop. Over the next few days, Marcus dug deeper. He called the notary's office, left messages, even drove to Linda Chavez's registered address, a small brick house on the edge of town. She wasn't there, but her neighbor mentioned something interesting. Linda's notary stamp had been reported stolen 3 months ago. That was all Marcus needed to loop in the district attorney's office. Within 48 hours, the DA had opened an investigation into potential forgery and real estate fraud. Meanwhile, I was told to stay alert and keep recording everything, which turned out to be wise advice because a few nights later, the Scotts made another move. It was around midnight when my phone pinged. The security system sent a motion alert from the edge of my driveway. I opened the feed and saw two figures again, one tall, one shorter. They were carrying something metallic between them, maybe a canister or a tool bag. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped onto the porch, heart pounding. "Who's there?" I shouted. The taller figure froze, and I recognized the stance immediately, that lazy slouch, that arrogance, even in the dark. "Aiden." "What the hell are you doing on my property?" He hesitated, then muttered something I couldn't hear. The smaller figure, maybe one of his friends, whispered frantically, "Let's go, man," Aiden smirked. "Enjoy your house while it lasts, old man." Then they sprinted off into the night. By the time the sheriff arrived, they were long gone, but my cameras got perfect footage of both their faces. Marcus called it gold evidence. I called it the final straw. The next morning, we sat down with Deputy Reed and the DA's investigator, Caroline Morris, a woman with the patience of a saint and the eyes of someone who'd seen every kind of scam. She reviewed the footage, the letters, the forged deed, and the expired notary record, then looked up at me. "Mr. Turner," she said, "you're sitting on a textbook case of criminal harassment and attempted property theft. We'll need a formal statement and access to your security logs. You'll have everything I said without hesitation." While the county built its case, Marcus had another idea. "If she wants to play bureaucratic games," he said, "let's beat her at her own." He pulled up the Silver Willow HOA's Articles of Incorporation and started highlighting section after section. "See this? They only have enforcement authority over parcels specifically platted under their subdivision map. And your property," he flipped to a page showing my lot clearly outside the boundary line, "isn't even on it. So legally," I asked, "they can't find me, inspect me, or even contact me." "Exactly. Which means every notice she's sent is not only invalid but potentially mail fraud if she used postal services." He grinned. "And guess who loves mail fraud cases?" "The feds," I said, realizing where this was going. "Bingo. The U.S. Postal Inspection Service takes that stuff personally." Marcus contacted them the next day. Within a week, I had 2 federal inspectors at my house, both wearing suits far too warm for the summer heat. They examined the envelopes I'd saved. Same return address, same fake HOA letterhead, same P.O. box registered under Eleanor Scott's name. One of them, Inspector Willis, smiled slightly. "You did good keeping all this, Mr. Turner. This woman just turned a neighborhood feud into a federal offense." For the first time in months, I felt a spark of hope. But Eleanor wasn't the kind of woman to sit quietly while the walls closed in. A few days later, I was cleaning the porch when a courier pulled up and handed me a thick manila envelope. Inside was a formal complaint from the HOA's attorney, or rather the attorney Eleanor had hired without the board's approval. The document accused me of interfering with community operations, defaming leadership, and threatening residents with firearms. It demanded $50, 0 inches, damages, and immediate removal of unauthorized security equipment. I almost laughed out loud. Unauthorized security equipment. They were referring to my cameras. Marcus reviewed it and shook his head. "This is pure intimidation. There's no legal ground here. But we'll respond officially, not because she deserves it, but because we're going to make this part of the record." He drafted a counter-response citing malicious prosecution and abuse of process. And just for good measure, he sent copies of the forged deed and federal case number to Eleanor's supposed attorney. That was the end of that. The attorney withdrew within 48 hours, stating he'd been misled about the nature of the case. It was beautiful, like watching a tower of lies collapse in slow motion. By late August, the investigations were in full swing. The county subpoenaed Eleanor's phone records, bank statements, and email correspondence. It didn't take long before patterns emerged, multiple fine payments deposited into her personal account, and several emails instructing her son to handle Turner's property situation quietly. Marcus called me the moment the DA confirmed it. "She's cooked, Jacob. They've got enough to charge her on 3 counts already." Still, I kept my guard up. People like Eleanor don't go down without drama. And sure enough, a few days later, I spotted her again standing across the street pretending to water her flowers, watching me with that same icy smirk. I remember thinking, she knows something's coming. Maybe she can feel it. What neither of us knew then was that the real showdown, the one that would finally end this nightmare, was only days away. And it wouldn't happen in a courtroom. It would happen right here on my front lawn, in the middle of a storm. The storm came without warning. One moment the lake was calm and glassy, reflecting the silver of a rising moon. The next, thunder cracked like a gunshot over the hills. The wind howled through the trees, whipping branches and slamming my screen door so hard it nearly tore off the hinges. I was sitting at my desk reviewing Marcus's last email, the one confirming that the county prosecutor was ready to file formal charges against Eleanor Scott for forgery and harassment when I heard it tires on gravel, slow and deliberate. At first I thought it was the wind carrying sound from the main road, but then headlights swept across my living room wall. I stepped toward the window and saw a white Lexus SUV parked halfway up my driveway, its engine idling under the rain. Of course, it had to be her. I grabbed my raincoat and phone and stepped onto the porch. Rain came down in thick, stinging sheets, turning the gravel into mud. I shouted through the storm, "Eleanor, what the hell are you doing here?" The driver's door opened, and Eleanor emerged, clutching a clipboard under a plastic folder to keep it dry. Her umbrella flipped inside out immediately, but she didn't care. She marched toward me, hair plastered to her face, eyes wild. "Mr. Turner," she yelled over the wind, "you're in violation of community emergency protocol. I'm here to inspect your shoreline." I blinked rain out of my eyes. "You're out of your mind. This isn't your jurisdiction, and it's a storm, not an HOA inspection day." She lifted the clipboard like a badge. "Silver Willow Safety Committee authorizes emergency checks during hazardous weather events." I almost laughed, but my pulse was too fast for humor. "There is no safety committee. You invented it." She took another step closer, mud splattering her heels. "You don't get to decide that. You're part of this community, whether you like it or not." At that moment, a bolt of lightning tore across the lake, followed by a bone-rattling crack of thunder. The flash lit her face, twisted, drenched, furious, like some deranged monarch, defending her imaginary empire. I felt a cold wave of realization hit me. She wasn't just power-hungry anymore. She was unraveling. "Eleanor," I said, lowering my voice, "go home. You're trespassing. I'm calling the sheriff right now." She jabbed her finger toward me, trembling. "You think you've beaten me, Jacob. You've turned the board against me, poisoned this community with your lies, dragged my son into court." "I didn't drag anyone, I cut in. Your son vandalized private property and threatened me." "Those were his choices." She let out a bitter laugh. "You're going to regret this." Then she turned and stormed toward her SUV. But before getting in, she shouted something that made my blood run cold. "You won't have this house by the end of the week." Her tires spun, flinging mud as she sped down the road into the dark. The next morning, the rain had stopped, but something in the air felt wrong. My phone buzzed nonstop emails from Marcus, missed calls from Deputy Reed, and a voicemail from a blocked number that made my skin crawl. "You should have taken the deal, Turner." Click. Marcus finally reached me around 10 a.m. "Jacob, listen carefully. The county clerk just got a second forged transfer. Someone tried to push through a correction filing overnight using your parcel number. The DA's office intercepted it in time, but this is escalating fast." I swore under my breath. "She's not stopping until she's in handcuffs." "That's the plan," Marcus said grimly. "The DA's preparing a warrant, but we need concrete evidence linking her to the forgery. Something physical, phone records, fingerprints, handwriting. If she shows up again, don't confront her. Call the police immediately." I promised I would. But as the day wore on, I started to feel watched again. Every time I looked out the window, I swore I saw movement, a glint near the tree line, a shadow by the dock. The anxiety clawed at me, tightening my chest. By sunset, I'd had enough. I went outside with a flashlight and checked the perimeter. Everything seemed normal until I reached the edge of the dock. There, half buried in the mud, was something shiny. I bent down and pulled it free. A USB flash drive. It was soaking wet but intact. Someone had tried to hide it or maybe drop it in a hurry. I dried it off and brought it inside, plugging it into my laptop. The drive contained a single folder labeled HOA documents. Inside were dozens of scanned PDFs, forged letters, fake violation forms, templates for HOA notices, and then one file that made my stomach twist. Transfer authorization, Turner property, PDF. The document was the exact forged deed. Marcus had shown me complete with my fake signature. But this version had tracked metadata showing who edited it. User escott@silverwillowho.org. Eleanor. I called Marcus immediately. He went silent for a long time, then said, "Jacob, back up everything. Copy it to 2 drives and send one to me. This is the smoking gun we needed." The following day felt like the calm before a verdict. Marcus handed the files to the DA, who in turn contacted the state's Bureau of Investigation. The forged documents, the metadata, and the mail fraud evidence painted a perfect picture. Eleanor had orchestrated the entire campaign, from fake fines to attempted theft. But she didn't know yet that she'd been caught. That night, I received a call from Deputy Reed. "Just a heads up, Jacob, we've got plainclothes officers watching your property. The warrant's being signed as we speak. If she tries anything tonight, we'll be ready." I thanked him, hung up, and went to bed. But sleep never came easy anymore. Around 2:17 a.m., motion sensors triggered again. My cameras lit up Eleanor's SUV creeping up my driveway, headlights off. She got out holding a flashlight and what looked like a clipboard again. But this time she wasn't alone. Aiden was with her. I whispered to myself, unbelievable. I dialed 911. She's here again, on my property, with her son. While I spoke, I watched them through the feed. Eleanor pointed toward my porch, and Aiden hesitated before moving closer. He was carrying something, a tool, maybe a crowbar. Before they could reach the steps, red and blue lights exploded across the lawn. Unmarked cars swarmed from both ends of the road. Officers shouted, "Hands up." "Drop the tool," Eleanor froze. Aiden panicked, stumbling backward. Within seconds, they were surrounded. I stepped outside as Deputy Reed approached, raincoat glistening under the flashing lights. "Mr. Turner," he said, almost smiling, "we got her." They cuffed Eleanor right there in the mud flashlight beam reflecting off her soaked pearls. She screamed, "You can't arrest me. This is my neighborhood. I run this place," Reed replied calmly. "Not anymore, ma'am." Aiden didn't resist. He just stood there, trembling, face pale. As they led her past me, our eyes met one last time. Her voice cracked. "You think you've won, Turner. They'll replace me. Someone always does." I didn't say a word. I just closed my door and locked it behind me. The next morning, Marcus called with an update. They're charging her with 3 counts, forgery mail fraud and criminal harassment. The DA also confirmed the stolen notary seal was found in her home office. It's over, Jacob. I sat in silence, watching sunlight break through the clouds over Silver Willow Lake. The water shimmered again, calm, almost innocent, as if the chaos of the past months had been washed away. "Over," I repeated softly. "Yeah, maybe now it can be." But even as I said it, I knew the story wasn't finished. Not really. Because in small towns like ours, scandals like these don't disappear, they echo. And somewhere behind another picket fence, another HOA president was probably sharpening their smile, ready to start the next fight. Still, for now, the lake was quiet. And that was enough. The morning after Eleanor's arrest, the whole neighborhood felt different, lighter somehow. The same people who used to glance away when I passed were now waving from their porches, pretending they'd been on my side all along. The lake shimmered under the pale sunbirds, returned to the docks, and for the first time in months, I could breathe without that constant weight pressing on my chest. But peace in Silver Willow never lasted long. It never did. By mid-afternoon, news trucks had already lined up along the main road. Someone must have leaked the arrest report because Channel 9's van was parked right by the gate and a reporter with too much hairspray was practicing her shocked and appalled face. The headline on her teleprompter probably read something like, "Local HOA President Arrested in Bizarre Property Scam." I stood on my porch with a mug of coffee watching it all unfold. It was surreal. For months, Eleanor Scott had terrorized me behind closed doors, fake fines, fake deeds, fake authority, and now the entire county was watching her downfall live on television. Marcus called around noon. His voice was calm but tired, the tone of a man who'd been on the phone with prosecutors since dawn. "Jacob, they executed the search warrant at her house this morning," he said. "You're not going to believe what they found." I leaned against the porch railing. Try me. 3 separate binders labeled compliance actions, each one filled with copies of forged citations, fake HOA memos, even handwritten notes about how to pressure homeowners who resisted. And guess what? You're in all 3 volumes. I let out a long, slow breath. She kept records of her crimes. "Oh, not just records," Marcus added. "They found envelopes of cash, thousands of dollars, payments from residents who thought they were paying legitimate fines. She was pocketing them. That landed like a hammer. All those homeowners she'd bullied into compliance, all the couples who'd quietly settled disputes they'd been victims to. And now, their money was evidence." The sheriff's office issued a statement that afternoon, confirming that Eleanor's arrest was part of a larger investigation. Apparently 2 more board members were also being questioned. The entire HOA was suddenly scrambling to distance themselves from her. Deputy Reed stopped by that evening to check in. He was still in uniform but looked exhausted, his boots caked with lake mud. "Just wanted to give you a heads up," he said. "She's being arraigned tomorrow morning. They'll probably try to set bail, but the DA's pushing to hold her. Too much risk of tampering with witnesses." "Witnesses like me?" I asked. He nodded. "Exactly. Don't be surprised if the defense starts digging into your background, trying to make you look like some conspiracy nut. It's standard," I laughed bitterly. "After all this, they can dig all they want. I've got everything on record. Reed smiled faintly. That's why she lost Jacob. You played it smart. Most people in your position would have yelled back or given up. When he left, I sat outside long after dark, staring across the lake. The wind was gentle again, rippling the water's surface in small, calm waves. For a while, I let myself believe it was over. Then, 2 nights later, I learned just how wrong I was. It started with a phone call from Marcus at 9:46 p.m. Jacob, you near the TV, turn on channel 7. The urgency in his voice made my stomach twist. I grabbed the remote and switched it on. There she was, Eleanor Scott, sitting in a bright orange jumpsuit behind a metal table, giving an exclusive interview from county jail. The Chiron read, HOA president claims she was framed. The reporter leaned forward dramatically. Mrs. Scott, are you saying these accusations are false? Eleanor's face was pale but defiant. Absolutely. That man Jacob Turner, he doctored those documents himself. He's been trying to destroy this community for years. I was protecting our neighborhood. The reporter nodded sympathetically as if she were interviewing some misunderstood activist instead of a felon. Eleanor continued, her voice, trembling just enough to sound convincing. Jacob Turner is dangerous. He threatened my son. He's obsessed with driving us out. Everything I did was for the safety of Silver Willow. I stood frozen, remote in hand, pulse thudding. The camera zoomed in on her face as she added, he's not even a real homeowner. His property title is under dispute. Marcus sighed on the phone. She's spinning it. Probably her lawyer's idea to seed doubt, muddy the waters. Well, it's working, I muttered, watching the flood of online comments scroll across the bottom of the screen. Typical HOA drama. Who even knows who's lying anymore? Sounds like that guy forged the deed himself. The internet didn't care about facts. It cared about chaos. By the next morning, my inbox was filled with messages from strangers, some supportive, most hostile. One simply said, "Hope they take your house next, thief." Marcus called again later. "Ignore the noise," he said. "The truth will come out in court. But be ready, her defense might subpoena you for a deposition." "Good," I said through clenched teeth. "Let them. I'll bring every letter, every timestamp, every clip. She can lie all she wants, evidence doesn't." 2 weeks later, the arraignment took place. The courthouse was packed, reporters, neighbors, even a few HOA board members pretending they had nothing to do with her. I sat near the back with Marcus, trying to stay invisible. When they brought Eleanor in, she looked smaller somehow. Her hair was flat, her skin pale under the fluorescent lights, but the arrogance was still there. Even in handcuffs, she held her chin high like royalty forced to attend a peasant trial. The judge read the charges: forgery mail, fraud, criminal harassment, attempted real estate theft. Each one carried potential prison time. When asked for her plea, she said clearly, "Not guilty," the courtroom murmured. Marcus leaned over to me and whispered, "That's fine. It means discovery will give us full access to her communications." The judge denied bail, citing risk of witness intimidation. Eleanor's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. She just stared straight ahead, right at me. For a second, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Not anger this time, but something colder: calculation. That night, I got another anonymous message. This one wasn't threatening, it was curious. "Check the HOA office basement. There's more than letters down there." It was unsigned, but something about the wording made me think it came from someone inside the board, maybe one of the members finally trying to clean their conscience. The next morning, Marcus and I drove to the HOA office with a deputy and a warrant. The building itself was a converted boathouse, neat from the outside but musty within. We headed downstairs, flashlights cutting through the dark. In the far corner behind stacks of file boxes was a locked cabinet. When the deputy pried it open, a smell of mildew and dust poured out. Inside were folders labeled with resident names, dozens of them. Each contained copies of personal information, bank statements, property appraisals, even photos of houses from hidden angles. "Christ," Marcus muttered. She was running her own surveillance program. And at the bottom of one box, under a pile of old newsletters, we found something worse. A folder labeled Turner, active. Inside was a printout of satellite images of my property, copies of my grandfather's will, and a list titled Next Steps: Confirm Deed Update, File for Public Easement Claim, Apply Pressure via Fines, Forced Sale or Forced Eviction. There it was. Her plan step by step. Proof that this hadn't been personal, it had been strategic. She'd been trying to absorb my property into the HOA's control for financial expansion. Marcus closed the folder gently, like handling a live grenade. "This," he said, "isn't just harassment. It's organized fraud." The deputy nodded grimly. "This is enough to indict half the board if they knew about it." We packed everything up and drove straight to the DA's office. As we handed over the evidence, I finally felt the weight begin to lift. Still, as I stood in the parking lot afterward, staring at the courthouse dome gleaming in the afternoon sun, one thought lingered. She tried to steal my home and almost succeeded. If I hadn't kept those letters, if I hadn't called Marcus, if I just ignored one minor violation notice like most people did, everything my grandfather built could have been gone, erased by paperwork. And that realization hit harder than any of her threats ever had. That night, the lake was perfectly still. I sat by the water's edge, the moon reflecting off its surface like a silver coin. The air was cool, clean. Behind me, the house glowed softly under the porch light, solid and real. For the first time in months, I whispered out loud, "You're safe now, Grandpa," and maybe, just maybe, I believed it. The day after we turned over the evidence from the HOA basement, everything in Silver Willow seemed to explode. The story was on every local station and half a dozen national outlets by noon. They called it the Silver Willow Property Scheme, an HOA conspiracy to illegally seize privately owned land for expansion. By evening, there were helicopters buzzing over the lake, reporters camping outside the gate, and neighbors whispering in clusters along the sidewalk. Some people were shocked. Others looked quietly relieved, as if they'd been waiting for Eleanor Scott's fall from grace for years. I watched it all from my front porch, the same spot where this whole nightmare began. It was strange. After months of being the neighborhood outcast, I was suddenly the reluctant hero. People I'd never spoken to before were stopping by with casseroles, pie, or awkward smiles. "Mr. Turner," one of them said, "we're sorry we didn't believe you." I just nodded. "You don't have to apologize. Just remember what she did." Because what Eleanor did wasn't just about me. It was about power. How one person could twist a community into her personal kingdom simply by convincing everyone she was right. Marcus called later that evening with updates from the district attorney's office. "You're going to want to sit down for this," he said. I did. "They've confirmed that Eleanor was transferring not just your property documents, but at least 6 others. She'd already forged 3 more quitclaim deeds, 2 in neighboring counties. Her plan was to rezone this entire shoreline as a private HOA-controlled lakefront district." I felt my jaw tighten. She was building an empire. Exactly, Marcus said. And she almost pulled it off. She had 2 appraisers on payroll, and a developer lined up someone from Atlanta who didn't know any better. They were days away from submitting the first redevelopment plan. "So if we hadn't found that folder, your grandfather's house would have been bulldozed by spring," he finished. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I just listened to the sound of wind rustling through the trees outside. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival. 2 days later, Eleanor's preliminary hearing took place. The courthouse was packed again, this time not with reporters but with residents, dozens of them clutching documents, letters, and old payment receipts. They'd all come forward after the news broke, realizing they too had been targeted. The DA, a sharp woman named Linda Pierce, opened with a speech that could have come straight from a true crime documentary. Eleanor Scott abused her position of authority to fabricate violations, extract illegal payments, and forge property transfers under the guise of community management. She did this not once, but systematically, across multiple households for financial and personal gain. The air in the room felt electric. I could see heads nodding, fists tightening. For some it was anger. For others, relief that the truth was finally being spoken aloud. When it was my turn to testify, the clerk swore me in. I took the stand, palms slightly damp. "Mr. Turner," the DA began, "can you tell the court what happened when you first encountered Mrs. Scott regarding your property?" I recounted everything: the confrontation in the driveway, the fake fines, the vandalism, the midnight break-ins, the forged deed. As I spoke, I could feel the weight of months of fear and fury finally loosening from my chest. When I finished, the courtroom was silent. Even Eleanor's attorney didn't interrupt. She just sat there staring at me with that same cold, unblinking gaze she'd always had. But for the first time, I saw something new beneath it: defeat. After the hearing, Marcus and I grabbed lunch at a small diner downtown, the kind of place with cracked red booths and endless coffee refills. We sat by the window watching rain streak down the glass as people walked by clutching newspapers with Eleanor's mugshot on the front page. Marcus stirred his coffee. "You know, Jacob, you might want to consider a civil case. Restitution for damages, emotional distress, property repairs." I shook my head. "I just want my life back." He smiled faintly. "That's exactly why you should do it. People like her count on exhaustion. If you don't hold her accountable, she'll think she still has power. He was right, of course. But part of me was just tired of the phone calls, the paperwork, the endless cycle of proving what should have been obvious from the start. That night I sat at the kitchen table staring at the binder I'd built, every letter, every receipt, every screenshot. My entire battle in one 3-inch thick capsule of evidence. I flipped through it slowly, page after page, until I reached the first letter, the fake violation about the non-existent door knocker. I smiled. You picked the wrong guy, Eleanor. The following morning brought another twist. Deputy Reed showed up at my door, hat in hand, with that look that always meant trouble. Jacob, mind if I come in? Sure, I said cautiously. He sat at the table, sighed, and said, Aiden Scott's confessed. I blinked. To what, the vandalism? To a lot more, Reed said. Turns out he was the one who broke into your shed, trashed your mailbox, and left that USB drive behind. But here's the kicker, he says he did it to stop his mother. I frowned. Stop her. Reed nodded. He claims he found out she was planning to transfer your property without your knowledge, and he panicked. He tried to take her files to expose her, but she caught him. They fought. He ran off with that flash drive you found by the dock. For a long moment I didn't say anything. I thought about that night, the rain, the shadows, the figures running through the mud. I remembered how Aiden hesitated before running, how his shoulders had slumped like he'd been carrying more than just anger. Maybe he really had been trying to help. What's going to happen to him? I asked finally. Prosecutors might cut him a deal for cooperation, Reed said. He's providing access to his mother's emails and text logs. If half of what he says checks out, Eleanor's facing decades. I nodded slowly. Good. Maybe there's hope for him yet. Reed gave me a small grin. Funny thing, Jacob. A lot of us figured you'd pack up and leave after all this. But you're still here. I looked out the window toward the lake. This place isn't just land to me, it's history. My grandfather built it with his hands. No one, no HOA, no greedy tyrant is ever taking it. A week later, the HOA board voted to dissolve itself. The remaining members resigned publicly, citing a loss of community trust. County officials took over maintenance of the shared roads, and a group of neighbors formed a volunteer committee to handle simple issues like trash collection and lighting. When they asked if I wanted to join, I laughed. You'll forgive me if I sit this one out. The lake community began healing in small ways. People started talking again, not through letters or fines, but across fences and driveways. Kids played by the water without fear of noise violations. It was like the neighborhood had remembered how to breathe. As for me, I repaired the fence, replaced the mailbox, and repainted the old porch rail that had taken the brunt of last year's storms. Every nail I hammered felt like closure. One evening, while tightening a loose board by the dock, I noticed a family walking along the lakeshore, a young couple and a small boy tossing pebbles into the water. They waved as they passed. The boy shouted, "Nice house, mister." I smiled, feeling something I hadn't in a long time, peace. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and wet earth, and for the first time since this ordeal began, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was grateful. Grateful that the house still stood, that the truth had come out, that justice, slow and messy as it was, had finally been served. I stood there until the sky turned orange, the lake glowing like liquid fire. Somewhere out there, Eleanor Scott was sitting in a cell, her empire reduced to dust and paper. And me, I was still right where I'd always belonged, home. The fall air around Silver Willow turned crisp, and for the first time in a long time, the lake reflected peace instead of tension. The scandal had quieted down, though not entirely. The HOA's collapse had left a vacuum, and as always happens when authority vanishes, chaos tried to slip in. Some residents wanted to rebuild the HOA under a new name. Others wanted nothing to do with any kind of association ever again. Every other week, flyers appeared on doorsteps calling for a fresh start for Silver Willow. They were anonymous, unsigned, but the formatting, the tone, the bold capital letters, I recognized them instantly. It was Eleanor's style. Except she was still in county jail awaiting trial. I called Marcus the moment I saw one. "You think she's still pulling strings from inside?" he sighed. "Wouldn't surprise me. She's filed half a dozen motions from her cell, already claims she's being mistreated, demands for early release, even a handwritten petition saying she's rebuilding community trust. Classic narcissism. She's trying to rewrite the narrative before sentencing. So who's making these flyers could be one of her old board members. People like her always have loyalists, the ones who still believe she was just misunderstood." He paused, then added, "Don't worry, Jacob. None of this changes what's coming. The evidence is overwhelming. Once the trial starts next month, she's done." For a while, I believed him. I wanted to. But a few nights later, around midnight, my motion sensor lights flicked on again. At first I thought it was a raccoon, but when I checked the security feed, my stomach tightened. Someone was standing at the edge of my driveway. They weren't moving, just standing there facing the house. Too far for the camera to catch the face, but close enough to feel wrong. After a few seconds, they turned and disappeared into the dark. The next morning, I found a note tucked under the windshield wiper of my truck. The handwriting was jagged, rushed. "You think this is over?" It isn't. She had plans for all of us. No signature. Marcus came over later to pick up the note and added it to the growing folder of evidence. "Could be intimidation," he said, "or it could be someone trying to scare you into leaving before the civil cases finish." Either way, I muttered, they picked the wrong house. A week later, I was subpoenaed again, this time not for Eleanor's criminal trial, but for a civil forfeiture hearing tied to her assets. Apparently, the DA's office was working to seize any funds she'd gained through fraudulent HOA activities and return them to victims. When I arrived at the courthouse, the atmosphere felt different, quieter, heavier. Eleanor was there wearing the same orange jumpsuit, but looking thinner, older. Her eyes darted between reporters like a trapped animal searching for sympathy. When she saw me walk in, she smirked. Her attorney stood and began with a speech that could have won an Oscar for delusion. My client was merely overzealous in her duties. While her actions may have been misguided, they were not malicious. She believed she was protecting community interests. The DA stood up immediately after. Protecting interests by falsifying documents, stealing funds, and terrorizing residents, Mrs. Scott's zeal nearly cost innocent people their homes. The judge, a stern man with steel-gray hair, didn't say a word until the arguments ended. Then he leaned forward and said, "Mrs. Scott, the court finds sufficient cause to freeze all assets connected to your activities under the Silver Willow HOA. This includes personal accounts, property, and holdings." Eleanor's composure cracked. "You can't do that. That's my money." The judge's gavel came down. "Not anymore." For the first time, she looked small, not powerful, not intimidating, just small. When the hearing ended, I walked past her without saying a word. But as I did, she whispered something low enough that only I could hear. "You didn't win, Jacob. You just slowed me down." I kept walking. I wasn't giving her the satisfaction. By early November, word spread that Eleanor's trial date was officially set for the following spring. The DA wanted to consolidate the charges, and the FBI had joined the case due to the federal mail fraud counts. Life slowly began returning to normal again. The neighbors, once divided, had started hosting weekend cleanups and potlucks by the water. Kids carved pumpkins on my porch for Halloween, something unthinkable 6 months ago, when half the block was too scared to even look my way. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something still lingered, a residue of paranoia that clung to the air like humidity. Every creak of the dock, every unfamiliar car that slowed near my driveway sent my heart racing. Marcus called it post-trauma vigilance. I called it reality. Because a week later, something else happened, something that reminded me just how deep Eleanor's reach really went. It was a Thursday evening when a white envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address, just my name typed neatly in the center. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "You were right about her. Check the storage unit on Old Pine Road, Unit 47. I showed it to Marcus immediately. He frowned. "Could be a trap, could also be legit. Let's do it by the book." The next day he met me there with Deputy Reed and a warrant in hand. The storage facility sat on the edge of town, rows of rust-colored doors stretching toward the woods. Unit 47 was near the back. When the padlock was cut and the door rolled up, the smell hit us, first stale air mold and paper. Boxes stacked floor to ceiling, labeled in Eleanor's meticulous handwriting, HOA, Archives 2000 and 19-2023. Reed carefully opened the first box. Inside were bank ledgers, receipts, and dozens of handwritten letters from residents, all complaints, all ignored. In another box, we found photos, aerial shots of homes, cars, backyards, even families. Surveillance she had personally ordered. And in one box, near the bottom, we found something none of us expected, a black binder labeled Succession. Inside was a typed plan for reinstating the HOA under a new name, Silver Willow Preservation Council, with appointed members, new bylaws, and one listed chairperson, Aidan Scott. Marcus swore under his breath. She was grooming him to take her place. Reed shook his head. Unbelievable. She was setting up a shadow HOA even before she got arrested. Every file was tagged, photographed, and boxed up as evidence. By the time we left, the sun had already set, painting the clouds a deep orange-red. I looked back at the storage unit one last time, half expecting Eleanor herself to appear in the doorway, smirking like she always did. Instead, it was just silence. That night, I sat on my porch again, watching the lights ripple on the water. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful, almost too peaceful. Across the lake, I could see the faint outline of the Scott mansion, now abandoned, its windows dark and empty. I thought about Aiden, the boy who had tried to intimidate me and then later confessed everything. Was he really free of her influence, or just waiting for her call again someday? People like Eleanor didn't just disappear, they infected others. Marcus called before I went to bed. The DA says that Binder sealed the deal. They're adding conspiracy to her charges. I let out a slow breath. So it's really over this time. He hesitated. For her, yes. But you might want to consider selling Jacob. There's a lot of press attached to your name now. Might be hard to live quietly again. I looked through the window at the old wooden beams, the photographs on the mantel, my grandfather's chair by the fireplace. I'm not leaving, I said firmly. This house survived her. It can survive the rest. Marcus chuckled softly. I figured you'd say that. Just lock your doors. As I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, I paused by the window. The moon cast silver streaks across the water, and for the first time in months, I didn't see reflections of fear, only calm. But as I was about to close the blinds, something flickered near the far tree line. A small faint light like a phone screen or flashlight moving slowly along the shore. I stared for a long moment. Then, without thinking, I whispered Aiden. The light blinked twice, then vanished. I stood there for a full minute waiting, but the shoreline stayed quiet. Maybe it was nothing, maybe it was closure, or maybe it was the beginning of something new. Winter crept over Silver Willow like a whisper, soft at first, then heavy and unrelenting. The lake froze in patches, the docks grew brittle with frost, and the forest beyond my backyard turned quiet enough to hear my own heartbeat. It was beautiful in that eerie cinematic way, but beauty never lasted long here without shadows lurking behind it. Eleanor Scott's trial was still months away, yet her name lingered like smoke over everything. Reporters came less frequently now, but every once in a while I'd see a car slow down near my property, a camera lens glinting from the window before speeding off. The media had moved on to other scandals, but the people who lived here hadn't. Silver Willow had become infamous, and everyone knew it. The remaining residents split into two groups. The first wanted to rebuild the neighborhood's reputation, repaint mailboxes, clean the lakefront, show the world that Silver Willow still stood for something. The other group, the quieter and more bitter one, wanted to tear down anything that reminded them of Eleanor, including the HOA office, and apparently anyone who ever defied her publicly. That second group didn't like me very much. One morning I found my name scrawled in chalk on the road at the end of my driveway, sell and leave. Marcus told me to ignore it. Cowards write in chalk, Jacob. They're harmless, but I wasn't sure. I'd lived long enough in this town to know that people who feared change could be more dangerous than those who chased it. Still, I carried on with my life. The holidays came and went quietly. I invited a few of the decent neighbors over for dinner, families who'd stuck by me through the madness. We shared food stories and laughter. For a night, the Turner Lake House felt alive again, full of warmth instead of legal documents and anxiety. But even in laughter, I could feel something lingering in the air, a memory of control of power unchallenged for too long. Eleanor had ruled through fear, and fear doesn't vanish when its queen is gone. It just waits for someone else to wear the crown. A week into January, I received a letter from the district attorney's office. The envelope was official sealed with the county insignia. Inside was a statement confirming that the trial of Eleanor Scott would begin on March 4th. It listed the witnesses, the charges, and a short line at the end that made me pause. Defendant requests permission to represent herself in part of the proceedings. I read it twice. Marcus called an hour later, his voice calm but cautious. Yes, it's true. She's partially firing her attorney. She's claiming no one understands her case like she does. I laughed bitterly. She's turning the courtroom into a stage. That's exactly what she's doing, Marcus said. She'll try to control the narrative again, but the evidence is airtight. Just stick to the facts when you testify. I've been sticking to the facts for almost a year now, I said. Facts are all I've got left. The night before the trial, I couldn't sleep. The house felt too big, too quiet. I found myself pacing from window to window, checking the locks, glancing out toward the dark tree line across the lake. That's when I saw it again, that faint flickering light. This time I didn't ignore it. I grabbed my flashlight and jacket and stepped outside into the cold. Frost crunched under my boots as I moved toward the shoreline, the beam of my light slicing through the mist. "Who's there?" I called out. No answer, just the slow creak of ice shifting on the lake. Then I spotted something half buried near the base of an old birch tree, a small plastic box sealed with tape. I crouched and brushed away the frost. Written across the lid in a rushed, uneven scrawl were two words, "For trial." I brought it inside, half expecting it to be some kind of prank. Inside the box was a USB drive and a folded note. The note read, She recorded everything. She never trusted anyone. This will end it. No name, no signature. Marcus came over within the hour, laptop in hand. We plugged in the drive and opened the files. What we found made my blood run cold. There were audio recordings, dozens of them, of Eleanor in her own voice. She was speaking to Aiden, to board members, to developers. Each file was dated, cataloged, like she'd been documenting her own corruption as a twisted insurance policy. In one recording, her voice hissed through the speakers. Once Turner's property is under HOA jurisdiction, we'll reclassify the lake access as community space. He can't fight what's already law. And, if he tries, well, the police only respect paperwork. Another file caught her laughing. People like Jacob Turner don't understand power. They think owning something means control. But control is what you convince others you have. By the fifth recording, even Marcus looked shaken. This seals her fate, he said quietly. She basically confesses to every charge, and then some. We handed the drive to the DA the next morning. When I took the stand during the trial, I expected the usual questions about letters, threats, timelines. But the courtroom wasn't like I remembered. It felt smaller, somehow tighter, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Eleanor sat at the defense table, no longer in an orange jumpsuit, but in a dull gray suit that made her look more like a ghost than a person. When it was her turn to cross-examine me, she stood slowly, a slight tremor in her hands. Her voice, though calm, carried that familiar arrogance. "Mr. Turner," she said, "would you say you've always had issues with authority?" I met her gaze. "Only when authority's built on lies." A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. The judge banged his gavel once, calling for silence. Eleanor tried again, her tone sharper now. "You think you're the hero here, don't you? You think you saved this neighborhood?" I took a deep breath. "I didn't save anything. I just refused to let you destroy it." She smirked, that same cruel, brittle smile I'd seen on my porch months ago. But behind it, I saw fear. Real fear. The kind that comes when someone realizes their empire of intimidation has finally collapsed. When the recordings were played for the jury, the room went dead silent. Eleanor's own voice filled the air, cold, calculating, undeniable. Her composure broke. She tried to interrupt, shouting that the files were taken out of context, but her lawyer's hands tightened on her shoulder, urging her to stop. By the end of the week, the verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. Eleanor Scott was sentenced to 22 years in state prison without parole. When the gavel fell for the final time, I didn't cheer. I didn't smile. I just exhaled long, deep, and quiet. In the weeks that followed, the town slowly began to rebuild itself. The HOA office was torn down, replaced by a public garden overlooking the lake. The county formally recognized my property as independent of any association, an ironic plaque marking the line where Eleanor's control had stopped. Aiden moved away shortly after the sentencing. I heard he was studying law now, determined to understand the system his mother had abused. I wished him well quietly from a distance. As for me, I stayed. I repaired what was broken: fences, trust, peace. Some wounds took longer to heal, but they did heal. One evening, as the sun set behind the frozen trees, I stood on the dock with a cup of coffee, watching the lake slowly thaw. The reflection of my grandfather's house rippled across the surface, solid, proud, unmovable. For the first time, in what felt like forever, I whispered to the water, "We made it." And maybe it was the wind, or maybe it was memory, but I could have sworn I heard his voice in reply, calm, steady, full of quiet pride. "Told you this house would stand longer than any storm." I smiled. The lake was still. The battle was over. But the lesson remained: power can be faked, fear can be weaponized, and justice can crawl. But truth, when you hold on to it long enough, always finds its way home. If there's one thing this whole ordeal taught me, it's that silence protects bullies, not victims. Eleanor's empire wasn't built overnight. It was built on the fear of good people staying quiet because they didn't want to make trouble. But trouble always comes when you let corruption grow unchecked. Stand up early. Document everything. And never assume that because someone holds a title, they hold the truth. For anyone listening who's ever been pushed around by an HOA, a boss, or a so-called authority figure, remember, you have more power than you think. You just have to use it. If you made it this far, drop a comment below, tell me where you're watching from, and whether you've ever faced your own Eleanor Scott. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, subscribe and stay tuned, because in the world of HOA drama, there's always another storm on the horizon.